Hey everybody, it's John Pollock and Wei Ting with a special post-news update coming off yet another round of WWE cuts. This series featuring several notable performers. They announced on Thursday morning the releases of Braun Strowman, Aleister Black, Lana, Murphy, Ruby Riott, and Santana Garrett. So this would certainly not be the highest number, but in terms of stature, I think the most surprising one, of course, being Braun Strowman, who is just coming off of a championship program that culminated with the Bobby Lashley Drew McIntyre match several weeks ago at Backlash, and a guy that had signed a 4-year extension back in 2019. So there's a lot to look at these releases, and I think the biggest question everyone is asking is, what are they slashing all of these costs for? When you're looking at someone with Braun Strowman, who is hardly someone you're looking at as just an extra part that we're not coming up with ideas for. Raw is very thin on that main event level. So that to me is as much a statement that you have to be looking at what is the overall game that's being played, what is the strategy in play, and we're left with those questions.
Absolutely. It's a move that certainly makes you ask some of these bigger questions, because I don't think this is just simply a case of spring cleaning.
We went through that. I mean, we went through that. We have gone through several successive ones when you include the cuts behind the scenes and in front of the scenes. And these are some significant costs that they are alleviating that, I mean, you have to be looking at, like, what is the end goal here as we are cutting all of these costs. We are putting several sectors of the company under one umbrella, eliminating redundancy. It feels on the surface that there's a larger strategy in play.
So I guess the biggest speculation is, something maybe in regards to a possible sale. It feels really early to maybe be able to say anything about that definitively. But nonetheless, this particular crop of people are very interesting. In particular, Braun Strowman, who, you would assume they would have some plans for. He is one of their high-ranking, I would say, main eventers at this point, former champion, somebody you can constantly throw into any sort of show, any sort of main event, and have it be a justifiable, reason to promote even a pay-per-view. But also, Aleister Black is really interesting as well. All those vignettes in those weeks leading up to it, a lot of production put into those. So something setting up an imminent return that he already shot an angle for with Big E. And the sudden, vanishing of all of that might suggest to you that this was a really abrupt decision.
Yeah, I mean, had this happened 2 months ago, Aleister Black would not have surprised me in the least. Someone that, I look at as, a tremendous talent and had a great NXT run, but the move up to the main roster has hardly been that. I mean, he had the tag team with Ricochet, which was a fine introduction when they brought up a series of NXT talents. And at one point, I mean, Aleister Black was being pegged for big things. I mean, when they were looking for a big opponent for Brock Lesnar, like I had been told, like his name was in the mix. They ultimately went with Drew McIntyre. That is not a decision I think you can second guess. Drew McIntyre has been a home run for the company over this past year plus in that main event role. But for Aleister Black, I mean, it's been like he has largely just been shelved. The fact that he had just been brought back to television, that you had gone to the extent of those vignettes you mentioned, Wei, yeah, it feels very cold now to just drop this Big E feud that you had just literally started. I spoke with one source at the company who I did ask, like, was Aleister Black a surprise? And this person had told me no, and that his return did not go smoothly. So you can take that for what you will. But I think he's a great talent. So, I mean, for all of these performers, you look at Braun Strowman, and he signed that extension in the summer of 2019. Lana, as well, had signed a big extension the same year in November of 2019. And what's going on in 2019? I mean, AEW is in its infancy, And that was when a lot of these big contracts were being handed out. Lana even tweeted at the time, I just signed a multi-million-dollar deal with WWE. So I don't know the contracts of all these people, but with Strowman and Lana, you're probably talking about significant figures that were attached to their deals, which if you're a WWE performer now and you're in that upper echelon, I mean, with these big contracts, I mean, also comes with a bit of a degree of paranoia with it. I think Braun Strowman is going to scare a lot of guys that if they would cut Braun Strowman, and maybe there's more to the story with Braun that we're not aware of yet, just an hour after this news, but you know, that number on your contract, it does become one that jumps off the page when this company is clearly in a mode of getting costs down.
Yeah, I'm sure that's a reality of several, industries anywhere. And ultimately, I think a move like this really shows that the company can move on without most of its roster. Everybody would be expendable, and that goes for people perhaps in the back as well as people in front of the camera. So it's not an easy feeling at all, I'm sure, to live with. But again, it's business, isn't it?
The other ones, Murphy, I mean, he had the big program with the Mysterios, but then, I mean, after that Rollins program, he was pretty much discarded. He had that one brief appearance earlier this year, but I mean, that's one that I don't think you can be too surprised by. Ruby Riott was signed in late 2016 and then called up within a year with the Riott Squad. And I mean, had largely just been part of this tag division after the feud and then reunion with Liv Morgan. I don't think they had really capitalized on these two in any meaningful way, and they had just become another tag team in what is a very thin women's tag division that, again, to these cuts, I mean, this really takes an already thin division on the Raw side and eliminates two teams in Lana and Naomi and Ruby Riott and Liv Morgan.
To be quite honest with you, I don't know if it's the roster depth that is their issue as much as it is creative. Like, that's, to me, has been the bigger issue this entire time. They could have all the best talent in the wrestling industry, and if you put them on some of these shows in these tag divisions, which, frankly, on either side, of either gender, have not really received the creative push that I think they've been deserving of. So I don't know if it really would have been helped. And at this point, unfortunately, I think Ruby Riott is a big mistake. Several of these people are a big mistake to let go. But, Ruby Riott, I can't imagine would be commanding that big of a contract that, you would feel that, her release would be able to loosen up so much. But I just think, these types of veterans like her are with a very different look that they can offer to those divisions. I think that's a big loss.
And then you have Santana Garrett, who had signed in 2019. She had made NXT appearances for years before she had been signed, and then was quietly being used on like main event and stuff last year. But I don't think we've even seen her since the Women's Royal Rumble this year. So that rounds out the cuts. And what obviously, we'll add this, Aleister Black did tweet this out. He has changed his Twitter handle to the name to Tommy N now, so reflecting what he will probably revert to. I'm gathering my thoughts as this was a complete left field for me, as obviously we just started the Dark Father character, but this was it. Thank you so much, WWE Universe, for allowing me to create and give you small bits of myself. So it sounds like he completely stunned by this news, and given the angle he had just kicked off, I can understand that this was very surprising. I'm sure he would have a different attitude if it had been prior to these vignettes starting, but it seemed that they had gone through these months where we had not had any involvement of Black on programming, and then suddenly, not just back on TV, but in a fairly prominent program with Big E that was just about to kick off.
So let's talk about the future. Where do you see these talents ending up?
It becomes tough. I think that AEW, what changes the equation is Rampage, and I think they're still going to be in a mindset of expanding. So if they did not have that third hour coming, I think you would certainly look at AEW having to sit down and be realistic about how many people can we bring in. But I think the attitude is probably going to be we're expanding and we're going to be a bit more loose with going out and throwing money out there. So I could see Strowman's an interesting one. I don't know if Strowman is a great fit for them. And with Braun Strowman, if you go back, he was on Lillian Garcia's podcast several months ago, and he had said that he will never wrestle for anyone except WWE and Vince McMahon. Now, that could totally change when suddenly this is presented with you. And do you want to change? Well, does he want to continue in pro wrestling? Like, this is a guy that did not have a background before WWE. He came from a different world and was suddenly making big money in pro wrestling. And I do not think he is going to get the kind of money he was making in WWE anywhere else. So to me, he is not a guarantee. I'm sure he is going to get offers, but what is his interest in continuing in pro wrestling and probably doing it at a lesser rate?
Oh, for sure. I would imagine that to be the case for everybody on this. Well, in particular, the bigger names, but certainly him. It's, it becomes this story has been, I think, for a little while now, not whether or not AEW could use them, but whether or not AEW has the room. They don't even have the room for the talent that they have. And they haven't really even made any room for the crop that was just recently released a few weeks ago. So I'm sure they're negotiating some sort of deal to bring some of that crop in. And now you have this others, roster to select from. Of the names that are listed, obviously you have to look at Lana as, somebody who I'm sure Miro is immediately texting Tony Khan, trying to get that done. But at the amount of money that she was likely making in the WWE, I don't think so. Not a chance. And
she was also Lana, one that when that whole third party deal went down, I mean, you saw those reports that like Lana stood to make a ton there. That is a silver lining to this, that opens up a whole area of revenue for her.
But without the TV exposure.
Without the TV exposure, that's right. So, I mean, that's, that is part of the entire thing, is how much impact is being an active on-screen performer for WWE. And I do want to say with Lana that there are going to be people that, criticized her work and such, but this is also somebody that worked extremely hard, especially over this last year during the pandemic, pretty much uprooting and going to Florida to work, to train throughout the past year. I think they're now living in Florida because they did have a home in Nashville. They might actually have both, but nonetheless.
There's no doubt what an incredible talent she is. We all saw it when she made her debut with Rusev. I just don't think her talents are in ring as a full-time performer. The occasional match, yeah, sure, she's done a great job of getting herself up to that level. But them deciding to push her as a full-time performer, I thought was, not the best use of her abilities. And so, you would hope that if she does continue her role in the industry, whether it be with AEW or maybe in another company, that we can see her kind of return to form as a tremendous promo, tremendous presence, and maybe some sort of leader of a stable, or at the very least, somebody who can elevate talents who really might not be able to speak for themselves.
I see AEW. I think like Ty Conti is going to open up a lot of eyes, that someone that doesn't flourish in the WWE system, if there is a glimpse of potential, that they're at least going to give someone a look. Maybe it doesn't mean signing them up to a multi-year contract immediately, but at least having an interest to see where she goes. And I would just say, given how hard she has focused on this, like, I do see her pursuing this. But it's always the question when step one for your career in the industry is in WWE. You don't have the coming up through the independents behind you, where it's more of a natural transition, that when WWE's over, okay, I'm just on to the next set of bookings. Like Lana, I would see continuing here, but
there's a room for her in any company that you would want to work in. Whether or not they can meet her demands monetarily, that's another question. But as far as in ring, there is no shortage of people that I think AEW could pick up to fit in their style. I mean, you look at Murphy; he is a shoo-in, really is shoo-in anywhere. He's somebody who I think would be able to flourish in any of the companies that are out there, whether it be New Japan or Ring of Honor or Impact. Or I think a lot of people would probably want to see him in AEW. Maybe
New Japan needs a shot of new blood in its scene. And once traveling restrictions are relieved, I would be aggressively going for Aleister Black if I'm New Japan.
Definitely.
And I'm sure that would probably be something that he would want as well. I see that being a real natural fit. Murphy as well. Like, I think Murphy could have like a great post WWE run to go out there. And again, like, those are the options. I think New Japan, granted, they might be limited right now with resources, but man, that talent roster does need an injection of something big, and Aleister Black could be that. I would say for this character he was crafting, I think Impact would be a great outlet for that. Whereas AEW, it just might be difficult based on available screen time to get on every week, especially for the character side of things. But I think Black is just going to be inundated with offers.
What does this mean for Zelina Vega?
That's a great question. She was reportedly at the Performance Center several weeks ago. And what does that mean? That was another curious aspect to this. Like, if in fact the WWE and Zelina Vega were working on some kind of return, it would make this an even more curious decision. But again, may have come down to just a simple financial reality where, things like storylines that are in motion or relationships, or like any of this stuff, that's all cast aside. It's, hey, we've got to meet a number, and these people fit the algorithm that gets us to that number. That's kind of how cold this becomes.
It's business, John.
That's it. And I mean, that is where we are. So those are the 6 cuts today. And I guess that is about it. And presumably all of them with 90-day no-compete clauses, so this will not be able to benefit Impact's Slammiversary promotional material.
Oh, man. Damn. Are you sure? Maybe they could just add some edits in, who's been in that company thus far? No.
Well, they can have their pay-per-view commercial ready for Bound for Glory, and then maybe we can update and have a brand new pay-per-view cycle where this is the company that has definitely been the most aggressive when it comes to benefiting off of the WWE's releases. It has been Impact Wrestling that has found a business plan out of it.
Yeah, and I'm sure several will benefit coming off of this one too. If it would be in the interest of all the other promotions that are out there to try to tease some, upcoming signings.
Just before we go, just a quick note that we have the number in for Friday Night Dynamite from this past weekend, and it was not great. They were down to 526,000 viewers, a .20 in the demo. They did 109,500 in Canada, which was actually better than I anticipated it being in Canada. But the U.S. number, not great. I think that this Friday has a better lineup, and you're also coming out of a really well-received pay-per-view. So I would expect this Friday to do a little better, but long-term way.
Condition the audience, the week prior that this show will be on Fridays.
Yeah, and that's going to be the struggle is, will this time slot work once it's regularly established come Rampage?
It's going to be a great question, especially, after the pandemic, where I think more and more people are going to relish the opportunity to go out and stay out on a Friday night, in particular in the Prime demo. But I guess what choice do they really have? I think it's worth at least taking a stab at the fallout from SmackDown as a lead-in. Do you have any indication of how many people might have crossed over from SmackDown to Dynamite this week?
That we don't know, and that's that's hard to see what the trickle over effect would be. I would see if we happen to get a quarter hour breakdown, it would be very interesting to see what the first quarter of Dynamite did, and if there was a big surge of people and then a tune out by the second quarter. I think that would give an indication of some that would be checking into the product and then maybe falling out. But I mean, how many did they pick up? And maybe they saw this lively crowd. It's like, wow, I'm going to stick with this. It's interesting because that is the hope here, is that you can siphon off some of that SmackDown viewership on Fridays.
If you're AEW, what do you think would be a number you'd be happy with this Friday?
For this Friday, I don't know the schedule in terms of what their sports competition is, but I would certainly be hoping that you could top this, that you could do. Like, I'm not expecting Wednesday night numbers that they can replicate on Fridays, even when Rampage begins, beyond maybe that first week novelty. So, like, I would say, I mean, here's the look at this. Like, this is not a great number. The fact they did a 0.20 in the demo, and NXT last week did a 0.13 in their normal time slot unopposed. That's still something. The fact that they are still doing a higher demo figure than NXT is right now, which had Finn Balor and Karrion Kross. It wasn't even some throwaway episode of NXT. It was a big hyped up episode. So I would say if you can, you would hopefully swell this audience and the demo goes up somewhat, but I am sure that they also do have the limitations of the NBA playoffs, which is taking a chunk out of all wrestling. But yeah, you would hope that does the buzz from the pay-per-view extend to a Friday and the follow-up. And a lot of those videos of just like the crowd, I wonder if I overvalue how important that is of a viewing experience, the novelty of having crowds back for an AEW product that is so interactive with its audience through the entrances and the liveliness of those crowds, that's an appealing factor too, which we didn't know going into Friday that would be the case.
I think this Friday will do better. Certainly, maybe by a bigger margin than people might expect, just simply coming off of the buzz and the conversation off of Double or Nothing. But in either case, this is a temporary move for the company. Hopefully, it doesn't extend into a third week. And I think when Rampage does come along, it'll be different. They'll promote it a whole lot harder than I think they have Dynamite. The shows will only be 1 hour, and people will eventually get into a groove where they'll recognize, okay, 10 o'clock Friday, I'm going to be there. They haven't done that for these ones.
Okay, that's going to wrap up our post-news update. So thank you for tuning in. We will be back if there is more news later on this week. And then Friday night, we are live with Rewind to SmackDown at midnight Eastern. We'll be live at 12:15, just after midnight, with reviews of both SmackDown and Dynamite. And a heads up that we have just posted our interview with Brian Fogel, the Academy Award-winning director of Icarus, who has just put out his latest documentary, The Dissident, chatting about the case around the murder of Jamal Khashoggi. And it's a great chat. I thought it was really in-depth in terms of the making of the film, some very interesting details, creative choices that they made, including how they had access to the audio of what went on in the consulate and made the creative decision not to include it in the documentary. I found that to be a fascinating answer.
As well, Brian talks about some of the struggles he's had trying to get this movie to be picked up. And we're talking about a man who won the Academy Award for Best Documentary for Icarus. That was a streaming film on Netflix that is probably still at the top of many people's recommendations. So the fact that he had difficulty getting this one picked up is very interesting, especially considering the subject matter. So I really love this chat. It was a great opportunity to pick the brain of elite level creative. So hope you guys enjoy it.
All of that is up at postwrestling.com, youtube.com/postwrestling. For Wai Ting, I am John Pollock, and thank you for tuning in.